And now, the moment you all have been waiting for. It's time for the Rad and Bad podcast by Hickory Learning Group. Here are your hosts, Mike Carrero and Sean Yoakum.
All right, welcome back to the Rad and Bad podcast, the podcast where we don't just talk about behavior analysis. We put it under the freaking microscope, spin it around a little bit, and ask the uncomfortable question, are we actually doing what we say we're doing? Again, I'm Sean Yoakum, and joined, as always, by my co-host, partner in crime, and clinical reality check, Mr. Mike Carrero. Michael, how you feeling?
Absolutely fantastic. We are almost halfway through the week.
Yes, halfway through the week. But depending on when you're listening to this podcast, you might be at the beginning of the week, the end of the week. So whatever day you're on, just enjoy whatever that day is. Life's about enjoying the moments, right, Michael? It's about enjoying the moments in life. And hopefully today is one of those moments where we're going after one of the most iconic and controversial tools in ABA. We are going to be talking about discrete trial training. Yes, DTT, Mike. We're talking about it. I think the thing some people swear by and other people, they swear at it because they're just mad at it, right? And I think depending on who you ask, DTT is either the foundation of effective teaching, or it's the poster child for everything wrong with ABA. Mike, your thoughts?
100%. I think it's a tool like no other. And oftentimes, because that's arguably one of the most familial things that people associate ABA with, that it's often scapegoated as the demon in the room, or it's we want people to learn and really understand, and that's the only way to go. I feel like there's a difficulty in finding a balance between the two. And that's more of a unique provider issue as opposed to the science. And we'll break that down here in a little bit.
Yeah. And I think the main problem, I think, is both sides are kind of right with this. I mean, this is another middle ground episode. We know DTT works, but working, I don't think is the same thing as actually being right. It's definitely not the same thing as being enough. So I think on this episode, we're basically asking, is DTT actually aligned with, our philosophical underpinnings with radical behaviorism, or is it just a procedural shortcut that we got comfortable with? And are we building functional, generalized behavior or just clean data under perfect conditions? I mean, I don't know. And I think the big one we're going to touch on is, have we turned a teaching strategy into treatment identity? Because I think that's a big thing within our field. Because if we have, then it's not science. We basically just built a culture, and culture doesn't always age well. So, Mike, put your seatbelt on, because I think this one's going to be honest. I think we're going to get a little uncomfortable with this one, and hopefully actually useful. So, are you ready to get into it?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
Are you sure?
Always.
Are you positive? All right. So let's just start here. We've talked about both sides being right. We talked about how we turned it into some sort of treatment identity. So I guess what we need to figure out from there is, what are the pros and cons? Do you want to start pros and cons, or do we want to talk about just saying the quiet part out loud first and kind of giving a brief synopsis of it?
Yeah, so I think we do a little history lesson first in terms of, helping people understand what DTT is and the intent and impact behind it. And I think that will be a good segue into kind of, how we got to where we are today and how you get to see both sides of that coin.
Yeah, I think we have to just say this first off. So DTT it's not a villain, right? It's definitely not a hero. Like everything that we've had on this podcast, we are very neutral with our science. DTT is a tool, and every tool in ABA, the real question is not, does it work? It's, what does it work for, under what conditions, at what cost, toward what goals? I think a lot of people, let's just say this out loud, I think a lot of people still talk as if ABA equals DTT. And that's just wrong. There's a lot of evidence with brief, explicit notes that ABA is the science and that DTT is only one method within that science. History and what DTT is, for those that don't know what it is, it's basically breaking behavior into discrete, hence using the word, discrete teaching units, and then basically repeated trials with prompts and responses and reinforcement, right? I think that distinction matters because once a field starts confusing like a procedure with a whole science, I think that's where we get the technical drift,
Mhm.
and that starts to take.
Absolutely. I'm going to add a little bit of contextual clarity to that too, Sean. Um, First off, I appreciate you referencing the aspect of what's known as an overgeneralization, right? The aspect of equating ABA to being DTT is no different than the first time a person learns that a four-legged animal with ears and a tail is a dog because that has a family dog, and then they walk out the house and go, "Oh, look, a dog," and you're like, "That's a cat, that's a bear, that's a horse," right? But they saw four legs, ears, and a tail, and went, "Same thing." So same, but very, very different. And so we have a little bit of an overgeneralization there. The other aspect of it is, and we've done a series on this as well, is ABA outside of just autism service based therapy, right? I would argue that when you look at DTT, the correlation and like reasoning for that strong equivocation there is because when you look at ABA as a autism based treatment, that's where that line gets confusing and people go, "Oh, well, you work in insert clinic, insert location doing the science of ABA as a therapy, and because you're using this tool and this tool can be used to significantly change or improve behaviors," right? That's where that, "Oh, you must be doing just DTT" comes from, which again, we'll talk about here in a little bit when implemented correctly, ethically, and appropriately, wonderful tool. As you referenced to a moment ago, when it's the only thing you're doing, that's where the issue starts to appear.
Yeah, it's I think also too to all your points that you just said, I think people then stop asking those conceptual questions as well. And they, like you said, it's like a format. We start worshiping that format. It's like, okay, we need the table, we need the chair,
Mhm.
we need the card and the prompt, and let me get the edible and the data sheet, and let's just repeat that over and over. And in 1980, there was an article by Hayes where he basically warned us decades ago that ABA can drift. I think he said ABA can drift into like narrow technical ritual when it loses contact within its conceptual system.
Mhm.
So let's start here. Let's identify some pros, or like, let's make a case for DTT.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Um, I think, well, first off, DTT is one of the clearest, most analyzable teaching technologies that we have within our field. Can we agree there? Like with tight stimulus control, repeated learning opportunities, clean prompting arrangements, efficient error correction, frequent contact with reinforcement. I think for early learners or learners with very limited attending, imitation, discrimination, or any kind of like, I don't know, instructional control
Mhm.
issues, I think that structure can be exactly what makes learning possible in the first place.
I agree. I want to add just a little like asterisk next to that. That is if and only if done correctly.
Yeah. Like with everything.
Yep.
There's also a big substantial evidence base around it. I mean, there's tons of reviews that are stating that DTT has met evidence-based practice criteria for like 58 single case study designs and has been used across a wide age range, outcome areas, including like communication, adaptive skills, play, school readiness, social skills, vocational, vocational targets. So the blunt truth is this, Mike. Yeah, if your learner is not acquiring a discrimination or not contacting reinforcement and not succeeding in looser teaching formats, then DTT can be the difference between like, okay, we hope the shit we're teaching you sticks, and to actually like, oh, actually, we actually can produce learning.
Mhm.
I don't think that's oppressive by definition. I think that's actually great instructional engineering from a pro standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that when you look at DTT as a whole, it is far more widely applicable in like the long-term outcomes of things, even as, adults, right, who don't receive a therapeutic service, right? We still go through either a structured version of DTT where we're checking on our own learning to be able to learn a new skill or perform something new, whether it's in a workplace environment, peer-to-peer relationship, you name it, all the way down to modified versions of it, like when you're in a neurotypical environment like school in a gen ed classroom, right? They still have characteristics and structures similar to DTT with delayed levels of reinforcement, structured criteria. Like there is a lot to be learned from the like skeleton and the application of it.
Yeah, and let's now play devil's advocate with it. Let's come up with a con here. So I think we could also argue the other side, and I think this is where the field has to stop being defensive. I think the biggest problem with DTT is not that it can't teach. I think the biggest problem is that it can teach in a way that looks only good on like graphs and like paper while failing the larger job for us in the field of behavior analysis. And you might be in the audience and listening to this going, why, Sean? Why is that? Well, it's because behavior analysts are not supposed to produce correct responding, only like a hyper arranged condition. Like it was said in Beowulf and Risley, like put generality and conceptually systematic at the center of the discipline, right? You said it before, like I think you mentioned like animals, like touching animals and like overgeneralizing animals. I'll use an example of a dog. Like if a child can touch dog at a table for like a token, but does not orient to dogs in real life, or comment on dogs, or play with dog toys, or contact natural reinforcement with playing with a dog around that repertoire, then I think the procedure may have produced a score increase, right? We talk about this all the time. We see a score increase, but we have absolutely no socially meaningful behavior going on.
Yeah, there's no intentful learning occurring behind it, right? It's the equivalent of like we live in like downtown like New York City, right? Straight hustle and bustle, right? And then we're going to do like the cow says moo, and we're labeling farm animals. Important to know, sure. Contextually relevant to the individual in their locations, not particularly, right? To add to your point, right? We are doing operant conditioning, right? That table is the place that you learn, and it's the only place that you learn, and it creates all of these other like ripple effects from behavior. And so you've got, let's look at an unconditioned stimulus of the table as just an existing four-legged object that you can put things on, right? Now it becomes a conditioned stimulus because this is where we're doing this activity, which then this is the response to that conditioned stimulus of either challenging behaviors or rote responding or non-contextual learning. Knowing that information, this is where the issue stops. We've talked about this many a different times, and you just touched on it, generalization and generality. Well, first off, let's talk about real world implication of congratulations, you can label this picture of a cat, right? Well, if it stops right there, sure, you know the picture of a cat, right? But do you know our stimulus equivalence triangle, right? Symmetry, transitivity, and going back and forth and reflexivity. Okay. If you can't complete the triangle, you have failed the skill. We don't complete the triangle in majority of those instances. And that's very relevant with skills that are not purposefully transferred outside of the clinic environment or outside of an environment in general, because we can use the home in this example too. Live example of that is playground skills or safety skills. You ever seen the little like toy crosswalks?
Yeah.
Right? And you get the beautiful little street on the ground that looks like a street. You may like, yeah, everything looking beautiful. What is that location missing, Sean?
A
A
lot of
2-ton
stuff.
vehicle that's going to go left to right, right? A horn. A lot of the very difficult things that you need to see and experience in order to be successful. And so, yeah, congratulations. In these four walls, in this person's home, at this park, you can cross the crosswalk. That is a good use of DTT because I don't want you to try and learn to cross the crosswalk in the middle of a like busy street, right? Okay. Pre-teaching using some DTT, you now have that skill. If we want to make this effective, I add that skill into the normalized environment for generalization because you have the prerequisite skills that were taught in isolation to be successful in the natural or quote unquote normalized environment.
Yeah. I mean, Stokes and Bear, what was that? It was 77 with the generalization paper. I think that's a big gut check. Like, we talk about this all the time with programming for generalization. It's not something that you train and hope that it's going to happen later. And you pray to the behavior analysis gods that like, we're going to get generalization, right? It's got to be programmed. And I think that critique hits DTT especially hard when DTT is implemented typically as mass context stripped trialing with contrived reinforcers and weak transfer plans. And there's a lot of comparative literature. I think Del Prado in 2001, there was a review of controlled studies found that in these language studies, more normalized or naturalistic behavioral language interventions outperformed actual discrete trial approaches. And those studies that looked at parent affect also favored the normalized conditions as well. So there's more recent work likewise suggesting that when you're adding natural environment teaching, it can actually outperform DTT alone on some outcomes. Now, does that mean that DTT is useless? No, it just means that maybe there's something a little uncomfortable there. Like the field, I think, got so seduced by acquisition data and sometimes acted like acquisition is the mission when that's not actually what the mission is. The mission is we need meaningful behavior change in the natural environment. So that's a con. Do you think of any other pros for DTT?
Let's see. I would argue that the ability to have like high volume repetition can lead to, again, we're going to touch on that point, to higher acquisition or faster acquisition of the skill. Because again, think of this outside of a learning opportunity. If you want to get better at running, what do you need to do?
Run
more, right? It might not look pretty, it might not be great, but eventually you will adapt to it because you're exposed to the continued stimulus of it and being able to change that behavior. Great. I think that can be seen as a pro for it because we're seeing the opportunity for learning be more present.
Yeah, I think also you can add to that like precision and control, because I think DTT gives you that tight control over your antecedents, your prompts, your responses, your consequences. You can isolate variables specifically when you're trying to teach like a skill that your learner does not have. It's not in their repertoire. So you might need DTT and you might need to account for all those variables to show that we could actually teach the skill and not just hope it emerges. So like if they're not getting it or they're not learning it, right, we need to engineer that learning environment. So that's what DTT allows you to do. I would say we kind of talked on generalization. I do think it being artificial and adult controlled could be a con for DTT because it is so highly structured and because it's often adult led, it's prompt heavy, it's reinforcer driven, like with contrived reinforcers. I think you can risk building prompt dependency and compliance with just, okay, I'm going to get through these programs. And then that child gets the thing after just completing whatever the programs were. They could be completely prompt dependent and not dependent on actual like acquisition of the skill. It just doesn't build independence. That would be a
I agree.
con I can think of.
I think this kind of ties back into your previous point regarding that you said 2022 or 2021 study.
Del Prado, I think it was 2001. It's over like 20 years
Sorry,
ago.
I thought you said 21. Dyslexic kicked in. So with that, when you look at that as a whole, right, that's because, let's look at response effort. It is far easier for your people in your environment to do things naturally than it is to learn a whole new skill, right? So if I ask you to come and join me and, do essentially a motor imitation of all of the things that I'm doing, that's going to be a lot easier for you to do than me to try to teach you a whole new skill to then apply to somebody else, right? Additionally, I 100% agree with you that like it is not quote unquote normal long term, right? No one's going to be sitting here with a token board in real time with your 4 tokens for you to do X, Y, and Z. No one's going to be able to completely remove all of the distractors from your environment to set you up for success with this skill. Additionally, you're not going to have either the quote unquote trained professional with you. You might have little to no support, or you might have someone that's equally learning the skill with you. And that again creates that boundary and barrier of I can't do this yet because I'm not prepped for success. I also think when you reference prompt dependency, that makes it significantly more challenging in the long term outcomes of it because we stay too long in the acquisition and maintenance phase of a skill and don't go into the generalization aspect of things early enough or at all. And then all we've done is created very specific conditions for that behavior to happen, i.e., I'm only going to look both ways to cross the street. If you go, oh, we're about to hit a crosswalk, we should look both ways, right? That's not skill acquisition. That's not true independence and implementation. You are serving as the SD to have that behavior change, right? I think that's the bigger issue there is we're staying in that too long and not working to reduce those prompts soon enough or at all.
Yeah, it's faulty stimulus control. You basically just the control of the behaviors under like the presentation of you saying all of that stuff. I think we got to get a little deeper, and I don't want to get into like an old ABA versus new ABA because I think that argument's bullshit. Like it's ABA. Like it's been ABA. It's been ABA since 1968. It's been ABA. There's no old and new, right? There's like buzzwords that get thrown out there, like with all this stuff. But I feel like if we were actually practicing the science how it was intended to be practiced, I think everything would be a-okay, right? I don't think the philosophy and the science of radical behaviorism, I don't think it's not a defense of like arguing for sterile drill work. Like, I don't want you to think, and Mike, I think you can agree with me, like we're not sitting here and saying like we need to do DTT all the time.
No.
We're not saying that. I think radical behaviorism, it's a philosophy of science built around selection by consequences. I literally just went over this with a bunch of RBTs today as we're recording this episode. This is cool to come full circle. Contextual explanation. So being able to explain things contextually and functional relations between behavior and environment. I think the whole framework that Skinner was trying to say is it's about understanding what those variables are that are shaping behavior and not about turning therapy into just compliance and acquisition, right? Would you agree there?
I would. And like, again, I loved your last statement there is this is where that line of, ABA is bad because all you do is DTT. Well, when we see this happen, right, and it appears as though it is compliance training, well, I understand that sentiment and why it looks bad because that is someone's experience and that's poor implication of the science.
Yeah, and I think that's too. I think when people do that, I think that's too shallow. I think that's actually we're looking at it too shallow. We're looking at it as like, well, DTT is not natural. Like I think no, that's a shallow argument. I think we actually have to dive deeper and be more philosophical with it. Because if we actually adhere to the science, we should be asking, okay, what contingencies is DTT arranging for? Right? What are we arranging for with this? What repertoire is it actually selecting? What stimulus control is being built? What MOs are present or absent? Like, do we have EOs and MOs and EOs and AOs here? What reinforcers are actually doing the work? And does this learned response survive when all the theater goes away, right? When we remove the theater? I think that's the honest audit that we have to take when we're making the decision to use DTT, right? We have to audit it. And I think if the answer is yes, or if the answer is the learner responds only under like when I'm present and I'm leading the session and there's these carefully controlled trials, well, then guess what? Like nothing wrong with that. The procedure may be technically behavioral, but it could be weak as hell conceptually, right? From a applied behavior analytic, lens. I think that's the difference between how we use reinforcement and actually think behavior analytically. And I think that's why we got to dive deeper into that, Mike.
I'll agree. And I think this kind of hits on some other topics that we've covered in the past. But I think when we look at DTT, the reason it gets a pretty bad reputation a lot of the times is because it's misunderstood, right? We don't understand the purpose behind it because it's been implemented poorly, and that trickle down effect of poor implementation and understanding continues to compound, and then it becomes this really, really bad thing. So I think at the root of it, right, it's understanding what is DTT, right? Once you have a core understanding of it, okay, how does DTT apply to this specific scenario for this specific individual, right? Okay, now that we have that done, what programming are we going to be looking at for implementing DTT paired with net and promoting generalization in the future, right? This goes back to kind of our road mapping series. This is building that skill to use DTT as a stepping stone to get into those normalized contexts with naturalistic reinforcers occurring, as opposed to contrived, like I'm going to give you the Skittles or I'm going to give you your toy when you complete this. In addition to that, the common argument that we hear, and I mean, I'll make the same argument of like, that's not real. And I will then expand on it because it's not if you do it this very small way, right? Looking at it, I had a conversation about programming this morning. We looked at safety with regards to like answering a door, right? Okay. Well, first we need to understand what that looks like. And we have our, let's say, step one of the program, right? So just being able to be acknowledge that there's someone at the door and not open it. Okay. Well, let's pivot from that. What is step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to I'm now able to go, all right, someone's knocked on the door. I can peek. I can say, who is it? And we have a variety of generalized responses and behaviors that we can engage in for that one small skill that we started in DTT. We started with, all right, cool. We're just going to acknowledge that someone's at the door and get someone to do it, all the way into true independence of being able to manage your own behavior in that. Because when we talk about it not being real, it's not realistic for someone to constantly be able to give you a tangible reinforcer or an attaboy, right? And I think people fail to plan because A, they might not know how, or B, it doesn't seem quote unquote realistic with where they're at to remove the reinforcers, right? They're not planning to have that intrinsic motivation occur and that level of like self reinforcement of I completed the task and the task is done being its own version of reinforcement,
Yeah,
right?
I think that's such a good point because I think that speaks to kind of the culture that's been around ABA and probably what the strongest criticism is of ABA. Lou Sandler talks about this all the time where it's like, we've just been only trained, new BCBAs are trained in a DTT model. And it's so true. Cause like you talk to so many people who they think they're doing natural environment teaching and like, they're just placing demands and it's just like, it's DTT, but we're like walking around a clinic or a home and like, it's still adult led and it's not natural environment. It's just DTT walking around. I think the biggest criticism, cause you kind of led into it a little bit, the DTT becomes a problem when it stops being a teaching procedure and starts being that culture. I think as a field, we have this history of building whole programs around sitting, compliance, eye contact, blocked escape, endless adult-led response chains. And a lot of people that have defended this in the past was not because I think the science demanded it, but mostly because the workflow does. And this is kind of a hot take here because number one, it is very easy to train someone on how to do DTT. It is, here's an SD. This is the behavior you're looking for. If they don't do the behavior, you error correct. If they do the behavior, you reinforce. It's easy to score. I think it's easy to audit. It's easy to sell as proven by Lovas, with his model, right? And it's easy to mistake for rigor, right? I think none of that proves that it's the best option for the learner that's in front of you. And I think in today's climate, I think what we've done a great job for people that have been advocating for like, the culture shift in ABA. I think we cannot talk about DTT honestly without talking about social validity. I know we did a whole episode on Ascent, and that was a fun one. But the big one I want to talk about is lived experience. I do think we have to acknowledge lived experience of individuals, autistic individuals that have gone through shitty implementation of DTT, right? It's clearly that. There's been a lot of behavior analytic discussions of social validity where it's emphasizing quality of life, safety, acceptability, inclusion of autistic perspectives, where I think there's been a lot of broader critiques of ABA-based intervention that basically push the field to kind of address like historical harms and treatment goals more directly. And that was from an article, I got to remember who wrote it. It was in 2024. It was by, I think, Baden. It was in Journal of Autism Developmental Disorder in 2024, where they were looking to seek input from autistic adults and the social validity of behavior interventions. And that was the prime one that got mentioned was, that early discrete trial training. So I think we do have to acknowledge harm of when whatever that cultural norm was around DTT, where that was what the plan was for early Lovaas ABA. But it still doesn't mean that the tool is not successful. It means that when it's applied for a shitty reason, it can do harm.
Yeah, I agree. I also like something that we didn't inherently talk about is we only talked about DTT from a like ABA therapeutic lens, right? We see this in all other service disciplines. It's
Yep.
just not formally expressed as we're doing DTT, right? And that's because when you look at, again, I'll give a very simple explanation of how we think we're doing natural environment teaching, but you're really just doing DTT on the floor, right? You and I are playing with, those little like Fisher type like barns
I
with
was gonna
the like
say, I was gonna
farm
say,
animals.
I was gonna say this rock that says I'm a rock star dad. We're
Well, you
playing with
are.
rock. I'm a rock star dad.
But you know that toy that's the little barn house with all the animals and stuff?
Yeah, with the it's got like a chicken on the top, and when you open the door, like
Yeah,
well, not a chicken, what's on the top?
it's the
Rooster. When you
bell.
open the door, the bell. It's got the bell on the
Yeah,
top, and you can ring it, and then when you open
cool.
the door, like a rooster crows.
Sure. You had bougier toys than I did. But when we
You're
look at those examples, right? Natural environment teaching implies that I'm using the items at hand and not contriving the situation to have some level of cause and effect, right? So I'm playing with the horse and I all of a sudden start clucking like a chicken and they're like, no, the horse says nay. And I go, yeah, the horse does say nay, right? We're embedding this naturally into the activity. I'm not asking the like very sterile question and holding up the reward or the token board, right? It is within the activity. Versus, this is when we talk about poor implementation, which leads to people having poor experiences, right? Of you're playing with your barn and the animals and having a great time and going back and forth. And then I'm like, 1, 2, 3, what's this? And it's a car. Well, first off, what does that have any bearing on the situation? And secondly, that's just DTT on the floor, right?
yeah,
And then again, kind of circling back to previous points, right? This is a tool in your tool belt, right? This is a skill that you have to hone and acquire in order to be able to deliver quality learning opportunities. No different than every other place that like says they do or don't do something. And like the easiest equivocation I can give to that is like with regards to like dog training, right? We see all the time of I'm a positive only dog trainer. Okay, well that means you're only using a level of like positive reinforcement associating like food, toys, etc. with that behavior. Well, is that always going to be realistic? Will it always work for that individual? Potentially, right? But that's just fancy branding. Right? You're avoiding the root cause of these are tools that you can use to shape and mold behavior to be socially significant and socially valid based off of the individual and the context around it. It's not this one size fits all where it's like we only do DTT and we only do NET and we don't do anything, right? That's just great branding. That's selling a product. And I think that's a big root cause of what we've seen is we're selling products of this is the right learning style, this is the right learning platform, not I'm going to support the individual with the supports that they need tailored to them. And how they respond to the world, right? Because if I look at you as an individual and say a little bit of DTT, a little bit of NET, we're going to do this and we're going to pull here and push here, that's individualized treatment, right? Now you have a better outcome, thus preventing and mitigating the response that you just referenced of, well, that was my experience and it sucked. I need to know what your experience was because I don't ever want it to look like that. It shouldn't look like that for anybody. And in previous episodes, we talked about it being, that's not ABA, right? Because you didn't adhere to the 7 dimensions, right? Technically, you're trying to do DTT. Technically, you're trying to use NET. However, you're not implementing it correctly. Therefore, you're not actually conducting that and you're not doing the right thing. You might be causing some harm.
Yeah. So I guess the main question, Mike, you got to answer this. The people want to know, should behavior analysts use DTT or should we just flush it down the toilet?
I think when appropriately implemented, trained, followed up on, and the plan for long-term impacts and execution of that skill in a normalized naturalistic environment, 100%. I mean, it is exceptionally beneficial for teaching safety skills in isolation to build that. It's also really beneficial for building those like prerequisite pre-learning style skills to build on in the future because you need a level of baseline for things. But like Spider-Man, great power, great responsibility. If you don't implement it correctly, you're going to be significantly hindering yourself and the individual because that rote responding starts to occur, that overgeneralization of what the system is starts to happen, and that lived experience really starts to come out in a negative way due to poor implementation.
I agree 100%. I think it's not something we flush down the toilet, but I think we use it when it's justified, when that learner needs like a dense, repeated opportunity for acquisition, or when the target is like a clear discrimination or foundational skill, or when naturalistic teaching has not produced efficient learning. Like if you've tried that and you're not getting efficient progress, or when prompting and error correction needs actual tight control. Or if there's like an explicit plan to like thin prompts, transfer stimulus control, and move rapidly towards natural contingencies. I don't think you use DTT. I think it becomes very hard to defend when the primary target is like spontaneous outcomes or social engagement or like flexible communication, play-based, context-sensitive behavior. Like if a clinician's like still trying to force those like repertoires through like really rigid adult-dominated trials, I think that's where like interventions like NDBIs, like early start Denver model is a good one. Like that's a good naturalistic ABA approach where you're built precisely because it was built precisely because they wanted like shared control, child initiation, natural reinforcement within all those goals. And I think you have to stop using DTT when the learner kind of has already gained that prerequisite repertoire and the clinician is still like pounding out mass trials because that's how we do the programs. Get in. Hi. It's like the 7 dwarfs in Snow White. Like they're just like, they keep mining the gems. We're just going to keep mining the gems because look, we got to get those gems, right? We got to get those programs. Like that's not science, right? It's basically, it's just, you're training a habit. I think, like you said, I think there is better outcomes for NET and DTT than just DTT alone. I got to remember there was a study that came out, I think it was in 2024, Yanchuk, the effects he did Yanchuk did a study on the effects of discrete trial and natural environment teaching. And what they found is that the study actually suggests that there are better outcomes when we're doing NET and NET with DTT rather than just DTT alone. But like with any episode, Mike, we have to find the middle ground here. So like, I think we might have found it.
Yeah. I would argue exactly that last piece that you just referenced, right? It is finding the balance and understanding the true impact and how to implement it correctly, right? Because if paired appropriately with natural environment teaching, promoting generalization, and using sterile opportunities, you have completed that package, right? You are able to, in isolation, understand the skill to then work on performance of said skill in a more naturalized environment, to then implement the skill individually across settings, time, and space, right? I think the balance and impact and importance of using those all at the same time is also a unique skill that people need to continue to grow and develop, because it's not like put it on a calendar, right? We've got a year. Quarter 1, we're going to do DTT. Quarter 2, we're going to do NET. And Quarter 3, we're going to do generalization and maintenance, right? That's not realistic. It needs to have a balance in the moment of, let's do maybe some graduated guidance where we're going to fade out those prompts in that moment to transition into a normalized environment that we know is coming up. So we're going to do a little bit of priming and some DTT to build that skill into the natural environment. And then as we continue to do that, we flow into new and novel environments to see if that skill is generalized, because that's going to set your individual up for long-term success, right? We're going to see a variety of different changes, and that happens not only within the individual, but that family unit as a whole, right? Because it's not, I need a table, I need to sit down and do this perfectly. It's life is messy, but we're able to adapt that skill in the moment for the individual, for those around them, for the environment, and make meaningful, purposeful change with it.
Got it. So I'm going to summarize what you just said for the people, because Mike just basically put a bow on this episode. It's a precision tool that we use inside broader, humane, a generalization first model. You hit the nail on the head. I think we start with program generalization from day one. If you cannot describe how the target will transfer across people, settings, materials, natural reinforcers, then you are not done designing the program. I think we have to start with function and learner readiness, and not just being loyal to the brand of DTT. You pick DTT because the learner actually needs DTT. Like Mike said, we got to fade from contrived to natural reinforcement as fast as the learner can tolerate it. Like I've said before, with social validity, and use that as real variables and not just being decorative because you want to adhere to ethics. I think I think if the learner hates doing DTT, you avoid it, or you only use it if you need to teach a life-saving skill. And I think we have to measure more than acquisition. I think we have to look for spontaneous opportunities, latency to initiate, variability. What does it look like for caregivers? How are caregivers teaching? Quality of life. Yeah. I mean, what I got out of this, Mike, is DTT is not abusive because it is structured. I think DTT is dangerous when structure becomes our field's excuse for intellectual laziness. I think if it builds prerequisite repertoires and then gets out of the way, then it's good behavior analysis. If it produces robotic responding and weak generalization, low joy, high adult control, while everybody celebrates the graph, well, I think that then is behavior analysis forgetting its own philosophy.
Yeah,
right?
You beat me to it, because I was going to say we're going to build independence, not building robots.
That's
right?
it.
You got anything else for us?
No, just I think we got to stop making the people we're working with just live inside a bubble. Right? We got to break that
I
bubble.
agree.
I think DTT does that, and I think we have to just explore outside of that.
Yeah.
Mike, this has been a great episode. Take us out.
Absolutely. So here's the bottom line. If DTT builds a skill and fades it out, it's good ABA. If a learner gets stuck in it, it's not. DTT should serve as a ladder. It's powerful and important, but meant to be climbed off of onto something else. The difference between running programs and actually being a behavior analyst is right there. That said, don't confuse your procedure with your purpose, and we'll catch you in the next one. Stay rad and bad. Peace.
Peace.